For more on the conflict in the Middle East, let's bring in CBS News' contributor and retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster. He also served as a national security advisor in the first Trump administration. General, always good to see you, my friend. Let's talk about this latest, which is that Israel claims to have killed Iran's naval commander. That is the man responsible for blocking the Strait of Hormuz. What could that potentially mean for reopening that waterway? Is that something that will allow that waterway to reopen, or do they just have somebody waiting in the ranks to take control?
Hey, Vlad, it's great to be with you. It's an element of striking the command and control, of their efforts to shut down the strait and to shut down traffic in the Gulf. Really, not even to shut it down, to meter it. So they're letting Chinese vessels go, for example, other vessels go, Indian vessels go. But I think what you're going to see is a shift in the focus of the campaign to reopening the strait. It had always been the plan, Vlad, to attack first. The most important targets which were the missiles, the missile launchers, the drones, and you've seen that huge drop off in the number of missiles that they can fire each day. I think it was like 10 yesterday, and then to also go after the sources of strength for the regime, their ability to repress the people, the leadership targets, the besieged, and the IRGC, these are the people who committed the mass murders in January of 30,000 Iranians in a 2-day period, and then their defense infrastructure, their factories, the supply chains, for all their defense capabilities, the Navy, which is on the bottom of the Persian Gulf. Now it's going to go to open the straits, and you're going to see combinations of aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft, Apache helicopters, the A-10 type aircraft, and the beginning of escorts at some point after striking those targets.
So let's talk about one of those sources of strength, specifically Kharg Island, right? I think everyone started to hear about this in the past couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Crown jewel when it comes to energy infrastructure for Iran. But Iran's foreign minister says that they're not going to negotiate. Do you think that the U.S. would go forward and try to take Kharg Island?
Hey, Kelly, I think it's possible. I think it would be Kharg Island plus other elements of oil infrastructure, because there's a valve that turns off the pipeline to Kharg Island. So I think there could be an effort to control that oil and gas infrastructure and to essentially gain control of maybe even the revenue associated with it, to drive the financing of the regime, to hold some of those funds and maybe a lockbox, if you will, for reconstruction after the regime is gone. But also you could see land forces used to take other islands that are critical to navigating the strait, or kind of the high ground on the Iranian side of the strait or of the Gulf, critical terrain that the Iranians might use to fire like cruise missiles, for example, which is the greatest threat to shipping. So hey, there are a whole bunch of uses for land forces. I think what is important to recognize here is that wherever that land force goes, there will be a kind of a protective bubble around it from an air defense perspective. We've seen the Iranian proxies, for example, in the last 48 hours, use these first-person view drones, FPV drones that are wire-guided. These are the drones that are most prevalent in Ukraine, and they're probably getting them from Russia, for example. So there'll be a real emphasis on protecting that force as it gains control of key terrain, if they are employed at all.
General, I want to get your thoughts on a Wall Street Journal report this morning, today, that said that the president has told White House aides that he wants a speedy end to the war with Iran. He's looking for an off-ramp. But you wrote in a Substack article published yesterday that there won't be peace in Iran until there is and I'm quoting you, a fundamental change in the government. So I guess how can both be true? If Iran's governmental system has been in place for nearly 50 years, they've just replaced the Ayatollah. Even if the U.S. and the Israelis succeed in killing that individual, my assumption is that there's another Ayatollah waiting in the wings, and the president's looking for an off-ramp. What's your assessment?
Well, Vlad, I think you're seeing a combination of a couple things. First of all, the president tends to make statements that are aspirational. He is kind of a marketing guy. He often thinks out loud. Now he does this in public a heck of a lot more than he did in Trump 1. I heard him think out loud every day, when I was in the job as national security advisor. So he's setting out kind of the aspiration. He wants a quick war. He wants it to be over. And so it's sort of, he markets that reality And he hopes that that life, reality will move toward what he's talking about. But also, I think, Vlad, what you're seeing is the fragmentation of the Iranian regime. That's why you're seeing President Trump saying, "Hey, we talked to these people who really desperately they want to make a deal," and then you see the Iranian public statement saying that they want reparations, they want acknowledgement that they'll always be in control of the Strait of Hormuz, that will stop the campaign against them and promise never to attack them again, and Israel will actually have to stop, defending themselves against Hezbollah, for example. So this is why you see these two completely different positions, I think mainly because of the fragmentation of the Iranian regime.
Real quick, Lieutenant General, you mentioned that the president is sort of thinking out loud, aspirational, but so much of whether we can potentially affect that regime change is public support. And if you sort of set the goalpost here and then it moves back, is that a concern, especially when people remember what happened in Iraq?
Yeah, it's a huge concern. And so I think if what the administration can improve most on is communication. So elements of it are there. If you go back to the president's first 7-minute talk about the initiation of the campaign, if you go to that first Pentagon press conference where the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, it really stated the military objective very clearly. He said, hey, our objective is to make sure that Iran cannot project power outside its borders. Then you look at the campaign, what they've done. They've taken out the missiles, the missile launchers, the drones, the defense industry, the Navy. So that campaign is doing exactly what it was set out to do. Now the question is, what has to happen next? And as I wrote in that piece, there won't be an end of this war because the war has gone on for 47 years until there is a regime in place in Iran that ceases its permanent hostility to who they call the Great Satan, the United States, who they call the cancerous boil, Israel, and of course their Arab neighbors, who they have kept enmeshed in conflict to weaken them so they can establish hegemonic influence in the Middle East. And of course, they've attacked 14 different nations at this point. So, hey, I think, Kelly, the reality is there has to be a shift in the nature of the regime for there to be a restoration of peace and, of course, a restoration of a degree of security for the Iranian people, especially after those mass murders in January.
All right, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, always great to have your perspective, sir. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you.